folks, welcome to 4coder Friday stream. Today I'm working on the project system, and before we do any coding I actually want to just take some time to think about what features I actually want in a project system. So let's think that through. So first of all, let's look at what the project system is like right now. For instance, in 4coder it has some stuff it didn't used to have, so these trues and falses over here can now, they're sort of marked up. They don't have to be. You could actually still do them without this to save the space, but I always forget which one is for deciding the footer panel and which one is for deciding the save dirty files. And so I'm just putting the names of those variables in now. This is a part of the new project system that's already been written, so like this version of the project system is the real one that works right now, is what I'm saying right now. And I intend to make a few more changes still. So one other cool thing you can do is you can pull out variables like these and then drop them in. So you can see, like here it says build x86 win32. Down here we have build x86 Linux, and the reason I did this is, first of all, it's a handy thing to be able to have this feature, and in this case, like, the reason I decided to pull them out and take advantage of this sort of variable type thing is these were really long build lines. Like, these are so long that they would overflow past this comma and all the way to this one, and it just made the whole layout messed up. So now I was able to fix the layout by using this sort of variable substitution thing. And the parser is set up to be able to handle things like, if it's going through a series of this variable goes to this variable goes to this variable, it does the cycle checking to make sure that you're not saying A equals B and B equals A and then saying, you know, oh, my command is A, and expecting it to find something. It will evaluate that up to the point where it sees the cycle and then be like, oh, I don't have any value, I have not been like defined well. So point is, that's a nice feature we already have, but this doesn't really change the project system. It just gives you more flexibility in the specification of your project, right? This gives you more power to specify your project, but it doesn't actually affect the project system at all. Today what I want to do is start thinking about what I'm actually going to do with the new project system. So, a couple of things. For one thing, this is the old way extensions worked is this. So, I'd like to keep using the name extensions for the variable, but we're going to have to put a version 1 there from now on, and so when you don't put that there, it's default version 0, and now this is version 1, and we'll have a thing that switches. So I want some kind of thing that'll say, alright, look at the version number and then act accordingly, and you know, this will lead to there being like a list of versions that are still supported in the core, and I want to think about how I'm going to maintain that list, right? I don't want it to become a thing where there are 10 versions and I'm still fixing bugs in version 0 because of the way I specified that it worked. It's more like when I'm on the newest version, the old versions are just there for legacy purposes, but I'm not maintaining them, and so if you want a bug fix, you have to upgrade. Something like this. So that's the first thing we want to do, is figure out what to do with these versions. Then what I want to do is something like, okay, here's the way extensions has been working, is you just specify a list of them with dot and then the extension all the way through, kind of as just a string that gets parsed. The new version, I want it to be more like patterns, and it'll be in an array format, and then you'll be able to put in like star.c and then .cpp, .h, .m, .bat, .sh, .4coder, root.txt, right? So this would be my patterns now. And you can see what I'm going for here is that this would also support, like, if you wanted to say, look, load all of the maybe you have like grammar files that are TXT files, but you don't want to open your other TXT files. You're just using the grammar ones as reference, and like your, I don't know, readme and license.txt don't need to be opened, maybe, right? So, so the idea is what yeah, it looks like we just got hosted by a JAI stream ending. That's cool. So yeah, you could also do like this, for instance. Who was it pointed this out? PLB13 points out, yeah, you could just do this pattern, and now you're getting C files, CPP files, CC files. Hopefully not anything surprising, but yeah, that's the idea. We'll basically have generic pattern matching type stuff for the to replace the extensions thing. Now, one thing to think about is, since this is going to be patterns, this is extensions, could I keep both? I feel like I could, and then you wouldn't necessarily need this versions thing to distinguish it, but I don't really want the old stuff sitting around that was this. So what would have to happen is that you'd parse this and add all of those as just patterns. Like something could exist which takes the extensions, if it sees that, and translates it into this internally, right? So that these would be equivalent, and you could still use the extensions method. And then, let's see. Yeah, so another issue is when I have a project right now, I'm going to need to think this through for a minute on some paper as I discuss it. Bear with me, folks. I'll try to explain what I'm drawing to a certain extent. Maybe, yeah, we'll see. I might show you what I've drawn as I work this out, but, so I have a situation where I have like a number of, or the structure of a project is basically, you have a file tree, and somewhere you have a folder that contains all the files of code, and in that you put, in that folder with all your code, like the root of your code directory, you put the project file. And that tells it that, first of all, wherever it loaded the project file, wherever the root directory is where it found the project file, that's where all the commands get executed that are in the project. So like these things here, build.bat with the x64, build the site, build a string, and so on, all of those things are being executed with their current directory being the path where I found the project file. But that is also tied with the idea of when you load a project, where does it find all the files that it automatically loads in? Because when you say load project, it automatically loads in all of the files for the project. But the way it determines what a file for a project is it starts at that root directory, it recursively searches down, and it finds all of the pattern matches for this right now. And in the new system it would be find all of these, but that's not good enough. Because I end up in situations where, yeah, so the reason that that's not good enough is because I end up in situations where I have a code directory, or I have a directory, and underneath it I have like my main code, and then like some big library like free type sitting there, right? I have the source for that sitting there, and then that is they're both in some folder, and then maybe somewhere else I have some other code that's shared, and I don't want to put my project in the directory that's so high up that it gets both of the shared code and the specific to that project code, but also the free type code, right? There's no way I can put it above the free type code without loading free type code in the current system. So I end up having to have two projects, one for over here with the shared code and one for that particular project, and I can't look at them both at the same time. Even though they're kind of a part of the same conceptual thing that I'm working on. And that's just because if I do set up a project that loads both of them, it'll also load the entire free type library, which I don't want all those files sitting around gumming things up when I never visit them, right? Let me take a quick second to catch up with the chat. Hey, we got Jim in the chat. I need to talk with you for a minute. So yeah, negative patterns is a good idea from Jim, so I might include that too. That might be something like, well, let's think about that. So how would I express that? I can't just put minuses, because those could actually show up in files. I suppose it could be like this, right? So these patterns won't be allowed to have slashes in them. So what we could do is say that a slash minus, like a slash is sort of an escape character, and then this minus is like a special rule that says, yo, this is a negative pattern. I don't want you to load, like, I want you, maybe it's like, look, I want you to load my text files, but I don't want you to load readme.txt or license.txt, right? That's a good idea. I'm down with that. I mean, it makes the matching a much more difficult thing, because right now, once you find that a particular file matches a particular pattern, like I go, oh, that matched. Now I have to also, I can't just stop there. I have to go and check all the negative patterns after I do that. But hey, it's still useful, and I think not that big a deal. So we can maybe see what it looks like to try to fit that in there. The other thing I wanted to mention to you, Jim, is that the Handmade Network set up a 4coder channel on Discord, and they Abner was looking for you on there and didn't see you, because I know you were asking about a Discord at one point. If you go join that Discord channel, they are hoping to make you a mod, I think. Let's see. So try Sublime Text 3. Yeah, I used Sublime Text 3 when I was writing 4coder on Mac, and I have to say, of all of the experiences of, like, there was Emacs and Notepad++ that I used when I was on Windows, and then I used Emacs more on Linux, and then Sublime Text on Mac for writing 4coder. Sublime Text 3 was the best one that I used in that. I also used Vim for a little while when I was first writing 4coder. That didn't last very long, but let's see. So we got some ideas on the escaping for the negative patterns. So probably a caret. Problem with that is a caret could actually be legitimately used. I guess if we're doing patterns anyway, I have to escape for stars being real stars, but I don't know. Paths are limited only to common symbols, makes it more complicated than it needs to be. Yeah, I'm not totally sure I understand those. So this right here is about pattern matching, not about paths. There's another thing I want to do about paths that's separate. But Jim in the chat suggested that there be a negative pattern. I was just trying to think of, is there an easy way to do that with a string? I mean, the really clean thing to do would be to say dot negative equals true, right? And then these would all just be like this. And so basically the negative field would have a default value of false. So what you could do is say, if we do all the work of typing in all these darn curly braces, then we at least get into a situation where we could do like, okay, so those are all just plain, and then we find out that readme has a negative pattern. This would actually be the cleanest way to do it, right? But in the sense that I don't have to do any weird parsing, and there's no like escape characters or like nonsense like that that I suddenly have to deal with. It's just more verbose. You can see how much more typing I have to do to put those braces in. Now, what I could do is say that there's like an implicit rule that's like if it goes to one of these, because this is not a statically typed language, it's just sort of data spec stuff. When it inspects an element in this array, if it finds a string, then it treats it as this with negative is false. If it finds a brace, like if it finds a compound, then it does the full thing. That could be what I do. We could also do, yeah, so that's another idea that was suggested, is we could just do a separate array like this maybe, and then we can put blacklist path. Then we can put readme.txt in there. That's actually a really nice idea because not verbose. Type system doesn't have to get a little bit wacky. I don't have to add new like conditional type expectation stuff that I don't have right now, and it's the least verbose of all of them actually. Yeah, so I like that idea best. We'll do it that way. Now, because that also actually organizes it into the way that I would want to access the data anyway. So that's definitely good. Okay, now about the directories thing. So that's patterns. The other thing we want to deal with is paths. So what we could do is something like this. Again, a list of strings, and then so would go like, okay, maybe I want one that's just like here, wherever the project file is, load everything that's in it, and that would let me do relative paths in general too, right? So I could go like go back, go to shared/code, and load everything in there maybe, right? Now, I usually like being able to do that because that makes makes it possible for the project file to move to a different file tree as long as the relative stuff that it depends on moves with it. But sometimes I want like full length paths. Like sometimes the file tree where the shared code is in this computer and where the shared code is in this computer is just not lined up with each other, and it's easier to not line that up but to leave it unlined up and have ways of putting things together. So, for instance, maybe I want to be able to do, I don't know, foo bar shared code, right? But the problem is if I do this and I move this to another computer, that just doesn't work anymore, right? Because foo bar c:\foo /bar/ that path might not be where the shared code is on another file. So although this lets me have, it doesn't force me to think about the trees as moving together. It doesn't actually solve the problem that I want to be able to go to a different computer and have it working too. I would somehow need to be able to say something like maybe like, oh, I have a shared path, and then I'm like concatenating this string onto this one. Now this language currently doesn't actually have expression operators like this, so this would be a big change to the language first, which would be to add in the ability for expressions to be more than just constants, but actually constants and variables combined in ways, which is a whole road that would be complicated. Complicated to go down. Let's see what are other ways I could do this. So another thing that we could say is that we do the full path, and we have some way of deciding which so this could be my Win32 load paths, and then I have load paths equals Win32 load paths. One thing I don't have right now, suppose I have like 3 or 4 computers that I may end up working on at any given time, and they all want to have different sets of paths. I could be like, oh, Alan home computer path, load paths, right? And then the question is, how do I have a second one that's like Alan Linux laptop load paths, and that one is like, oh, we have this, and we have something like I don't know, something like that, right? Because even if I have that, what do I do here? My project files are all supposed to be the same, and so now I need some way to be able to say, switch this on which computer we have, which it's like saying, if computer equals Alan home desktop, but this language doesn't support anything like an if, right? So it's just supposed to be a single fixed piece of data. So what I would end up having to do is, you know, it'd be possible, but I'd have to specify it like this. My load paths are, this is like load path systems, I guess. And they would go like this. So there's Alan home desktop load paths, and then what's the name of that computer? Alan home desktop. Now I still need some way for each computer to have it know the name of the computer you're on and switch on this, and so I still don't like this direction, but there's a possibility. Young Lena asks, can you make it so the window appears where you last had it open? I can. I haven't done it yet, but that kind of thing it's, you know, it's not that hard to get it done, and it'll be something I do when I'm polishing up at some point. Yeah. Okay. So the problem with this is mostly that it comes down to how on earth does each computer get its own unique name when we're in this situation. So, for instance, one thing I do right now is there's basically just 3 operating systems that are recognized, Windows, Linux, Mac, and it lets you set up different commands for each one, and that's as much differentiation as you get, but you get that automatically because the code can easily have built into it at compile time which operating system it's built for. So that sort of works for free because that level of identification between the computers is automatic. This would require actually setting the more levels of identification up, unless I just went ahead and did, oh, I have a Windows option, a Linux option, and a Mac option, and all your Windows options better match, but they at least don't have to match with your Linux and Mac options, which maybe want to be different, right? Well, have to be different in the case of Windows and Linux, but maybe not between Linux and Mac, but maybe they want to be different too. And of course, if they don't want to be different, you can just use a variable. So that has some attractive qualities to it. It doesn't give you full independence of how to change things, but I don't know if full independence is actually a good idea. This would give you enough independence to deal with the differences between operating systems, but if you had 2 Windowses, for instance, you'd have to keep them the same. Alright, so I don't think I'll go this route, but we'll keep thinking. I have a question here that raises an idea for a feature. PLB13 asks, does anyone know how to make the build output auto scroll? I assume you're talking about this, so like as it builds, right now I don't have any errors, so it won't actually be quite long enough. Well, it's just barely long enough. You can see that it stays at the top and doesn't move down with it. Now the reason it does that is so that when you say go to first error, you'll be at the top of the buffer, and you'll start your scan from there down. But it's actually quite true that sometimes I want to follow down and not stay at the top. And there's no way to do that right now because at the low level the system has the ability to specify that you want that, but the project file system doesn't export any I don't know, channel through which you can specify that you want that. So we can actually add that. Stay at bottom of output option. Yeah, so here's another kind of idea that I was considering that I like quite a bit, and this is from Wolverine Gator. He suggests, well, I assume he, sorry if I'm wrong, that we do something like load paths equals, and then we have like, alright, here's one of the paths. For this one we would have like c/foo_bar shared code, and then we would give another option which would be that, right? And then it would say, alright, for this one we're gonna, does this exist? Yes, then use it. No, then try this. That has a lot of attractive qualities to it. So these all become like sequences of options that you're trying to pick one of them, and that way you have like sets of like, here are various independent groups of things and the ways you can find those things. And if you're on a new computer where you can't find it, you can just put a new path in. I like that a lot. That actually works really nicely. The only downside to that is the amount of work it takes to check which one exists, but you only have to do this. This load all code is a one-time expensive operation, not a frequently done thing where we would want to be able to do it all the time. Yeah, so Delix is suggesting something that I feel like at some point this will be the case, that you'll have on your, like, let me go to where I store my binary files. So right, here's my 4coder exe file, 4.exe. Somewhere in here there will probably at some point be like computer.4coder, I think is what I would call it, and this would be like computer name equals Alan home desktop, right? And then what you would have is this never gets moved around. It gets stuffed with each of your binary files. And so you can then pretty easily say, like, look, no matter which project I'm looking at on this computer, this is a computer with a fixed name. The configuration for this doesn't move with projects, doesn't even live with projects. It lives with the binaries. And I feel like we could do that without actually too much trouble. Now that I say it, it's just that the way that like comparing this much code to how much code it took to set up everything else, right? Keep this one in mind. Here's one option. The other one is Alan home desktop load paths equals dot and c/foo_bar shared code, and then Alan Linux laptop load paths equals that and work shared code, right? And then I have like a load paths equals and each of these say which load path it is. So this uses this one, and it uses it whenever the computer name is Alan Home Desktop, right? And then Alan Linux Laptop. Right, so this works, and actually is fully expressive for like all possible situations. Like, this is the thing that gives you the full widest range of possible things you might want to specify. It just takes a lot more work to set up initially. I'm also wondering, are there any other advantages to get for setting up a computer name like this? Because once you've set up that computer name, it's true that it will not actually be a problem for moving projects around, but if this is the only feature for it, like, that's not a very good leverage for it right now. So I would want to know that I can think of other good reasons why I want the computer name. Like, I guess this sort of thing could probably come up a lot. I don't know. Control-Shift-L doesn't work if there's no line after. I mean, it's working right now. Are you doing that on the newest build? I think I had that bug in the previous build. Okay. So I want to think about which road I want to go down here. This is one of those situations where it's sort of a judgment call of what's important and what's not. So what's most important here is that it be somewhat. It doesn't need to be painless to get this right, because I mean, ideally it would be painless to get this right, but what I'm saying is, if there's a little bit of pain in the initial setup, that's not a big deal, because you usually don't change this stuff very much. Like, once you have your 3 computers set up, or whatever number it is, it's not like every week another computer gets added to the list and then an old one has to be retired or something. Like, that's very rare. So the only thing that changes a lot is maybe what paths to load, but even that only changes once in a while, right? So I guess the biggest danger would be that you end up with like 3 or 4 of these and you have to keep them in sync separately, and they're not quite the same, but even then, right? And you could of course be like, oh, it turns out that my Linux laptop settings are the same as my Mac settings, so this is like Alan Mac laptop, right? Just like that, and all of a sudden you've got another one up and running for a different computer that just happens to share that. So I feel like this maybe is what I'll do. Even though I was initially thinking I would write this out and say like, oh, look how much longer it is. This is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 lines, versus this one up here is 4. But this one, for instance, doesn't have a story about what to do if you're in a situation like this. Like, you have 2 paths that both exist on 2 different computers, and you want different ones on different computers, right? Like, suppose my Mac has work shared code, but I don't want to load work shared code. I want to load like Mac special, I don't know, special / shared code, right? But my Linux also has this, but I want it to load that one. Now that's a pretty weird case. I'm not sure how you would end up in that case, but it's true that this setup wouldn't actually handle that, and this one down here would. And I feel like if I'm going to pick one of these, I should pick the one that leads to fewer problems that are like walls. So like the problem with the one down here is the amount of work it is to set up is a little higher, but there's no wall where you're like, I am screwed, I can't get what I want. at the worst, you would have to like do a lot of work to set up a new one just because something small changed, but at least you can still get the effect you need. Yeah. Okay, we're actually doing it this way. So we're going to set up a computer name that'll go in. Alright, here's another question. So I have a config.4coder already. Now the difference here is the config 4coder is the same on all computers, whereas computer.4coder would be different on all 4coders, like on all your computers. And it might be that you want to be able to keep the config synced automatically somehow. So like you would have like when I update my config files, I download them automatically, or I have them moved this way, but then your computers, they don't. But the downside is, right now when you get a new build, the experience is like this. You get the build, and then you have to copy in all of your special changes that you've made to your config file and to your custom layer code if you have that version. And then you can start using it. Because I don't have any like auto update that only updates the files that are, you know, like synced to the central system. So, oops, I didn't finish the tea. So, what do we want? The problem with this computer.4coder thing is that it adds another file that you have to set up. Yeah, so Wolverine Gator has the right idea that it would be something like there's a global config and a local config, and global syncs across your computers and local doesn't. That's the kind of idea I'm talking about. The problem is I don't have any auto update kinds of stuff, right? I don't have an automatically keep something in sync, and I'm not considering building one right now. I'm considering, given that there's one that people want to keep in sync, their config, and one they don't want to keep in sync, their computer file, does that make it just that much harder to update to a new build? I think it does make it just slightly more annoying to update to a new build because it's just one more config file you have to move into the new folder, but you would have to get it from a different source than the other one, so it's another step. Which is why I don't love it. So what I think I'm going to do here's what we'll do. This will solve the problem. So what we're going to do is say we use this method, but you don't have to set one of these computer files up to use it, because what you can do is just say, alright, I have a Win, a Linux, and a Mac computer. And what we'll do is we'll say, if you don't specify, then your computer name just gets set to one of these. Right? This same idea would actually carry forward to commands too, because now if you have like two different computers that both want to do a 64-bit Windows build, but they're a little bit different for some reason, you could actually imagine that we can express that now by saying, look, if you set up a computer name, you can use that instead, right? And maybe what we can do is say that this is actually not the computer name, right? So the computer name can still be empty, but we're specifying by OS, not by name. And then maybe later we come back to it and we go, oh, you know what? I actually need to differentiate by name now. So I have two different Win computers, and it's like these are by name, and we're going home Win and like work Win or whatever, right? And that way we can now specify more separately, and then when we don't want to bother setting up different computer files because we're not in the situation where it makes sense to do that, then we can just do this. Alright, so I think that that's the plan for paths. Let's keep looking at what other things I want to look at. So we have a way to specify directories. It's a bit of work to set them up, but it's the fully featureful version that we're going for there. General file patterns, negative patterns, stay at the bottom option. Now, command specification options. So, the other thing I want to think about changing is these commands down here. Right now the way it works is you say which command you're setting by telling it which operating system this command is for in the variable name. Right, we have a different variable name for Windows, Linux, and Mac, and then a subscript that tells it which command you're setting for that, particular system. And then you give it a full description of a command, where a full description of a command means the build rule for the command, the output, and then the other flags that you want to set. But I kind of want to move to a world where the way you do this is more like we have build x64. And build x64 is a command that has, we'll figure that part out in a second, and then it says, oh, I output to compilation, and I have a footer panel, and I save dirty files, right? And then, okay, and then what's the actual specification of the command? Well, the idea is it would be something like, alright, maybe we have a Windows command that is like, oh, echo build x64 and build.bat. Right, there's the Windows version of the command, and then maybe we have a Linux version of the command, which is what, echo build x64 and /build.sh, right? And then we have to do the same thing again for Mac. Right, so that could be the way that we specify commands. This is what I've been thinking about doing, right? We specify a command, same level of granularity in terms of which command goes to which operating system, right? We specify the string of the command, and then the other, but for each operating system, and that gets built into, now we have a command that it ties together the settings so that these are all the same. You don't have the compilation duplicated out 3 times and this true and that true, right? These all get compressed down into, they only get specified in one place for all operating systems, and then these get bundled into one command, and when we say execute this command, we look at the command and go, which operating system do we pull out? That's the original idea I had. So I'll take a minute to think that through, upsides and downsides, in a sec. Need to catch my breath, read the chat. Yeah, that's not a bad idea. Tablet as a setting in 4coder.config. Let me add that to my to-do list over here. I'm already planning to add a few new variables to 4coder config in the next build, so I might as well take a look at that possibility. Okay. Alright. So, we switch to water here. Where to keep the water? There we go. So the advantage to this is, first of all, we don't duplicate this out anymore. We would also be able to shorten all this. So instead of having that, what we would then say is something like fkey command 1 equals build x64, And of course, there's no reason why we would have to even have a build x64 line anymore. We could just say our first command is this, right, if we wanted. And then we would have, like, 8 of those, and you can see this would definitely become more verbose in terms of the number of lines it takes, but I mean, maybe it's actually more readable in reality, because now we can fully reorder stuff anyway. So we could do like command and then right there we go. Now it sort of has this quality of being like even though it's verbose, it is more clear what each thing in here is, kind of. Another thing to think about, though, is that idea that we have this OS option versus a computer name option. So instead of saying, oh, this string here builds like this by doing that, what I could do is I could say each of these goes like this, and then we go OS equals win Linux Mac. Again, we're getting more verbose by doing that. So now I specify the command string that I want to execute, and then the OS thing here to give me the decider on which one to pick. And this here has just become an array of these things that I have to check each one of them, rather than a thing where I say I'm expecting a .win, a .linux, and a .mac. But then we can come in here and go, oh, I have 2 Windows computers now that are like slightly different, and one of them wants to do like build optimized for some reason, and so we have like, right? So that's starting to get really complicated in terms of the amount of code it takes, but I do kind of like that level of flexibility, again, because yeah, having the full range of specification powers just makes you a little bit more free. So I think that's the plan for commands, that we'll switch to like doing it like this. And that leaves the question, how am I going to transition all these other ones easily, right? I have this problem where I have a bunch of these that are already written, and I guess I'm just going to have to rewrite them all. There's not going to be a transition plan. So if you're using version 1, the hardest part will be switching all of these over. And that's that. No plan for like, oh, I discovered that you're using the old style thing, so I execute that instead. I'm not going to go down that road. Okay, one other thing I want to be able to do, so that's most of what I wanted to think about, but there's one other thing, which is that I actually don't want to even think in these terms exactly. What I actually want to have is I want to have like an F key command list, like this. And I just want to stick all of the commands into the list. Okay. So there's like, here's my list of commands, and maybe no, I don't know. Yeah, we could do it like this, right? So now what I have is just a series of commands. I probably want to give each command a name now. Right? But the idea is each command has a name and all of the features it needs to be a command, and they're just in a list. And the nice thing about this is now when you specify these things, you're not saying this is for now and all time bound to this particular number. You can see like right now I have this and this are both bound to the same thing. They're different, but they're bound to the same thing. Why am I doing that? Well, because sometimes I want F1 to do this and sometimes I want it to do this, and so I keep them both around and I switch which one shows up first to control which one is active. But I kind of want to get to a situation where I don't have to rewrite my project file to just change what mode I'm kind of using it in. I want to be able to get to the point where you've specified your project as sort of a set of commands that you have available, and then at runtime you can say, you know what, I'm going to just remap my commands for today because I'm doing different stuff than usual, and I want these commands to be active on these keys, and you can do that at runtime without reloading the project. That's kind of where I want it to end up. So that's why I'm thinking about, we have this list that we can use to find all of the commands that exist. And so it would be like, alright, there's our build x64, here's our build site command. It goes to site, it does not use a footer panel. And let's see, let's get rid of this for now, because I'm not actually thinking that I would need to use that right away. Yeah, so I think what I'll do is for now I won't actually support the name thing. We're just going to say, look, there's room inside this format to get there, but we're not going down that path right away. That'll be something that we add if it becomes a big enough deal, but hopefully just having operating systems specified using this syntax will be good enough. And like I said, we're using this syntax only because it gives us room to expand if we want, but we don't have to expand, right? Right, so there's my build site command, and so on. I would do all these build string. I would still be able to pull these out into build x86 and so on and so on. Of course, these are not actually the build site commands. This would be build site.bat, and then both of those are build site at sh. Right? Okay. Yeah, so I think that's where we're going with this. We're going to build out this, and then our actual thing down here is just specifying an initial state. Right, so this is build x64, build site, and so on. And so this specifies an initial state of which commands are bound to which keys when you load the project, but they'll be changeable at runtime. And this means we could fathom having situations where there are like such things as like modes, and we can specify what modes they're in, and then make it possible to switch between modes, and that changes your bindings completely in an instant, and so on. Right? A lot of room for growth using this setup. So I think this is what we're going to build. Alright, so that's command specification stuff, and then making a new project, we will do that later. We'll do building new projects after, like the thing that auto-generates new project stuff, we will examine after all of it works. Right? No point in thinking about that. That's just sort of a note for later. We can pretty much make it do whatever we want when the time comes. Okay. So now what I'm going to do is, this thing we've specified over here is kind of an example of what we want it to look like, minus that nonsense there, right? So I'm going to keep that as an example of what this looks like when it's, so open recursively, we also want to change that. So now I'm going to say no extensions. We're going to just try to keep this as simple as possible, so adding in things that link back to old stuff will just make my life harder. So in addition to this, when we specify a path, it feels like, how do we specify if we do recursion or not? That's the next question. So here I have how I load paths on my home desktop and on my Linux laptop. And I have a number of paths that I'm providing. I guess what we'll say is they're recursive by default, and if you want it to be non-recursive, what you could do is say this kind of thing. Then you specify recursive equals false with the path. And then I guess these would just normally be surrounded in braces to make them all like that. I don't know exactly. Maybe. Yeah. Yeah, we can do it that way, I think. Alright, so we have all these details figured out about where we want this to go. Now let's make a list of actually how we're going to, the order in which we're going to get these done. So I'm going to say, let's rewrite the to-do list a little bit. Version switch for old and new project file types. So one thing we want to be able to do is when we parse this new thing, it's going to produce a project. I want to be able to produce projects using the old thing, so that'll still work because, for instance, it'll be an empty blacklist, a patterns list that is just found by parsing the extensions that we used to get. The load paths will just be set by doing one of these, right? And its recursiveness will be determined by that variable that projects used to have, and so on and so on. All of the data that we have here, I think, maps back to, we can build these out by saying, get the name from the operating system and the index and just put it in there, and then have these, have these built out normally. So I guess it would just be like name equals 1, and then 1 equals 1, 2 equals 2, and so on, right? And yeah, in that way, internally, the system would set up the same. It'd just be that the parse is parsing very different looking files, but it's actually building the same internal structure. So there's one project system, and just it happens to have a legacy way of being created that doesn't give you access to all the features, and then this new way of being created. I believe that actually needs a semicolon too. Okay. Yeah, so version switch, and then once we have that version switch in place, we'll just go ahead and build out the full thing that interprets the new type of data, and yeah, so we're going to do fully upgrade the project, the internal project data structures for new features. And that means, let's actually do that first. So that means we're going to build a new internal system first, get the old thing sort of interpreting into that new data type, and then build a thing that understands the new type of project script. And when we're doing the new thing there, we're going to do, okay, first we'll do patterns, then we'll do blacklist, patterns blacklist, then we'll build it to understand load path options. Also, my plan is to have it still follow the rule that wherever you store the project file is the root of these commands for now. Maybe at some point I want to be able to have like a new feature that's like command root equals, and then we specify a path here, or something similar. But we'll build out one of the interpreter for that. Stay at bottom, command specification options. So this will be the command list. And then, yep, we can add that in. And then I guess before we are able to move on, we need to be able to do the fkey command. Initialization. Alright. These don't actually need to have underscores. They're fully okay like that. Alright, so there we go. There's the to-do list. Let's get to it. How long have I been streaming this planning session for? An hour. Alright. So there we go. We got through an hour of planning. Let's regroup for a minute in here. Alright, so Jim has brought up an interesting question. There's a built-in Alt-M command that is sort of like a precursor to the project system. And the way it works is to just search for a build.bat and run it. And nowadays I don't use it pretty much ever, because I always just specify a project file and run from that, and that, like with that, it just becomes F1 that is usually doing the build.bat, unless I end up in a fancier situation, like, you know, here I'm doing a little bit more with that than just build.bat. I also print out this build x64, so you can see that this was an Alt-M, whereas this has the build x64 because it came from the project. Which reminds me, I want to revert this all back to the old project now. Now that we're done building out the example, I copied out the example project, the example version 1 project file. Now I actually want my actual project file back to the way it was, so that if I need to tweak it or anything while I'm working, that it's still set up correctly for the current system. PLB13, I'm not really sure. I mean, I'm not using JSON here. I made my own little parser thing for I mean, JSON isn't quite right for my purposes, because I don't believe it has a couple of, like, I don't think you can do this, if I remember correctly. I might be wrong, might not remember correctly, but it does kind of look like JSON. That's basically the idea, is just specifying data to config stuff. Anyway, and it's interesting to think about, I mean, how, yeah, it's got me thinking about some stuff, but anyway. So yeah, so my point, so getting back to what Jim was talking about, so a couple things we could do with the Alt-M key. So right now it just searches for build.bat. What we could do is say that's what happens if there is no project, and if there is a project, that it could actually be like Alt-M, or I guess it would be over here. So fkey command, then we could call this like the sort of like build command, right, equals, and then this could be like, oh, this also does the build x64, right? So then there's just like, oh, you can specify what your build command is for the project, and then alt M is just the thing that executes the build command. And so if there is no project, the build command does the search for build.bat. If there is a build command, it just runs the build command, right? If there's a project loaded with a build command, it does that instead. That way it would be fully just sort of runtime rebindable like everything else. So there's, yeah, we can do that. I think that that's a good idea. The option that Jim's proposed was to have, like, instead of, right now it's like you hit F1 to trigger F1, and he's suggesting, like, if you did Control Alt F1, which does nothing right now, that would bind that particular one to Alt M. I don't really want to go that route because I'm actually thinking I want to save Control and Alt F keys for a future where I do like F key Control, or like Control F key Command 1 equals super fancy command or whatever, right? I haven't provided that before because it's like you have the Windows ones, the Mac ones, and the Linux ones, but you can see that once we can kind of separate out the idea of specifying a command and how it works on each operating system, we've now got a lot of that duplication concern. Even though the code is bigger, the duplication of the concepts is no longer there, right? These settings happen once, and these different ways to do it on the different operating systems are all right there next to each other, right? So now that we have that, that means that specifying more, this list down here can have more like stuff like this, maybe. So that's what I think I would do. Not going to do Control to F keys today, but maybe soon. I mean, I also might want to get to the point where it's just like numbered command, because some people want to be able to execute these from those, but you know what actually it would be these are F key commands. If you don't want to use F key commands, you don't have to. You can say, you know, I don't have F key commands, what I have are like control number commands. So then control 1 can be the thing that executes one of these, right? Of course I have stuff bound to control 1 through 3 right now, so I'd have to change that, but point is, we have the flexibility to build out all kinds of options like that now. Alright. I think we will do this for now, and things like a build command and control F key commands and stuff will be a part of the future passes. We're going to build this as our target today. Okay. Now, I want to get to the project code and kind of inspect what's the situation actually like in the real world right now. So command line, right now we have a Windows Linux. I've gone ahead and already reorganized some of this stuff in preparation for this. So I knew, for instance, that I was going to want this, which I have now. And that's just, you know, the thing that project or scratch, if I pull that up, that's just these things here, right? So it'll be like, what operating system? Windows, okay, what's the command line? Stick it there. What operating system? Linux, stick it there, and so on. In the future, this might need to get smarter if we're going to have like a variable number of these that aren't just operating systems, but also like computer names. Then we won't really have this list. What we would have is, well, there'd be like a command line string thing that we make an array of them, right? But that is not the situation. Welcome to the stream, Captain Craft. Alright, so that's this part that basically specifies this thing, right? Then there's F key command, which gives me the out, the command, this thing, the out, footer panel, save dirty files. So I'm going to change some of these to get their names to match, and we're going to add in a char name, and a name will be allowed to be up to 128 bytes for now. So one thing I want to do is get away from having these fixed width strings here. It does make life easier, but I actually just don't need them anymore because of other things I've reorganized. So that we will add project command. All right, yeah. Let's just one at a time get this internal data structure to be fully correct, one little step at a time. There we go. So we have that. Back to scratch. What else is going on? So dirty buffers, we're going to switch that to saying dirty files, and use build panel is going to be footer panel. Just again trying to make these things match up. Save dirty files. All right. What else can we do? So right now the project system has this idea of a single directory, which is the root directory of the project. This doesn't quite make sense the way it's set up, so I want to reconsider some things. First of all, why is there a dir pointer and dir space? Why isn't it not just like this? Okay, cool. So that's a little cleaner. Now this is the root of the project, which we still need for executing commands, right? But that's not going to be where we load files from. And so one question we want to think about is, are we storing that data, or is that a temporary thing that we get during a parse that we throw away afterwards? I'm not totally sure. So when we set a current project, what happens? We print the errors from parsing that project, and then we copy the input project into the current project global. We okay, so we do want to store a separate thing from this. Right now this is coupling where commands run and where we load all the files. We're going to try to merge that into, or separate that out. We're going to try to tease those apart now and add in a new kind of directory specification that does all the directory features we want, which are okay, so let's do, this should go here. Open recursively is going to go away, and eventually extension list will also go away. Let's see, we're going to say you're the fkey commands. we'll keep extension list for now, and might need to take a break to blow my nose and itch it a little bit. So here what we're going to want is something that matches this this setup here, right? In particular, I guess we don't actually need to store all of these separately. What we need to do is we need to say which one are we using right now when we're parsing, right? So when we're parsing, oh, you know, we actually don't need this. That's interesting. So we're actually not going to store that. We're going to store this, I suppose, right? Yeah. And the reason we can do that is when we're parsing this, yes, all of these are grouped together in the specifier, but we're already able to resolve this during the parse which one we actually care about, so the thing we store doesn't need all that information in there. Duh. Yeah. No, that's the right way to do that. Yes, okay, and then these are the things we want to load from, so when we pick one we don't have to store all of these. Again, we're going to pick one of them, and this format is an array of another format, which is strings that specify the path, and then the recursive flag. Okay, so project load path, and we'll say that one of these paths can be 256 for now. Again, planning to get off of the fixed width arrays of strings sooner rather than later anyway, so I'll just do that during that pass when I get all of them off of it. Recursive, guess I should add that to the to-do list, right? Let's do it right here. Get switch all strings, or as many as possible, to variable width. Yeah, so there's a load path, and then there's, take me back to scratch, there's an array of those that makes up the actual, like, project load again, we will get off of fixed width arrays sooner rather than later, so I'll just do that for now. PLB13, yeah, I get that crap once in a while where like the linker just be like, nope, didn't work. Doesn't happen so much on this computer. It happens more often like, well, yeah, it depends on the exact situation. I find that it definitely happens more often when there's like a high probability that you're building twice, or that like your building is overlapping with another application, an instance of it running, or an instance of it building somewhere else. But I also once in a while, like on a rare occasion, will just get a crash that references some crazy nonsense that's like, yo, I'm dumping some linker shit to you, and then you try it again and it's fixed. And it has nothing to do with anything other than like something went horribly wrong inside the code that is non-deterministic somehow, so I don't know where that even comes from, right? Yeah. Anyway, so we have a set of those, and then we're going to say project file load path set. Alright, so that matches up with whichever one of these we pick, and that's cool. So yeah, now we need to deal with the fact that open recursively isn't available, and how do we deal with that instead? Well, when we're loading an old style project, or when we're loading a version 0 style project, we need to fill this data in a way that makes it behave the way a version 0 project used to behave. So the way we do that, well, in this case, here we're setting the project directory. Yeah, so what we want to do is as well as all that stuff, the old style basically has one element in its path set, and we can set yeah, we can set the project load path set dot paths 0 dot path will just be what we get when we let's see. We're going to take that, and we're going to copy into that string that one, right? So that string up there gets copied into this one. We'll terminate it with null2, string 2, and there we go. There's that path is now set. And the only thing we didn't do is decide whether or not to make it recursive, but what we'll do is we'll say the default is that it won't be recursive, because that was the behavior of the old one anyway. And then if we come down here and we get that, then we'll just say, alright, we parsed out whether we want to open recursively. We can set that inside of this first path. So basically, we now have a set of paths. We used to not specify paths at all, so we just take the thing that used to be the thing that's coupled with the root of the commands, and just stuff that in as the first thing of the set, and that'll make it behave the same way it used to. Yeah. Delix mentions that he's also seen the thing where the with the linker failing. I definitely have seen it once in a while. No idea how I'm going to diagnose it. I can't even tell if it's my fault or not that it fails. It seems like it could be related to, there's basically this nasty thing where it's very hard. It's not as straightforward as people make it out to be to make an application pipe to another one and behave the way you would expect, because of like basically stream buffering kinds of stuff. The terminal gets different when you run something on a command line proper. It comes out differently than if you just pipe it. And to actually make 4coder correct, I would have to do more than piping. It would have to do like fancier terminal emulation stuff so that it gets the timing of when certain asynchronous things happen the same, which you don't get for free. It doesn't just happen because you ran it and piped the input into 4coder or the output into 4coder. Right? It's a bit more of a pain in the butt than that. Alright, OS index. so here the idea is we are deciding, here are the different names of the arrays. We can actually just do this in the old-fashioned style. I don't need to do all this fanciness. fkey command win Linux and Mac. And then, so there's our commands, and then what we want to do is config compound var. Yeah, we're not going to visit all of the operating systems. We'll ignore the ones that we're not actually using. And then the way it used to work, and then we grab out just that one that we actually are using. We will always do this. So we grab out the command that we're setting. Whoops, don't need to do that twice though. And then we say, alright, so we're filling this particular command because we know it's for the operating system. We pull it out by name directly. It's for the operating system we want. We know that we're on index J of the array, so we're going to set the appropriate fkey command inside the project. And then, yeah, it goes ahead and says, alright, here's how we extract information from this. So we're looking for either the first element of this compound or the one that's labeled command, cmd, and then we pull that out into a string and we do this. We set the command's command string from the command string we pull out of the file. PLB13, this is also a problem on Linux. It's actually, I wouldn't say it's worse on Linux, it's different on Linux. It was actually first noticed on Linux, not on Windows, but it's become obvious that in Windows 10 at least, it comes up more often, because I very rarely have that kind of behavior on this computer. But on the laptop and the work computer, both of them once in a while will exhibit the like linker failure weird thing where you have to just run it again to make it work. Not very common, but it does happen, especially when there's something weird happening, like I ran a different command first and it was like I accidentally hit F2 and then I hit F1, and even though they build completely different inputs and completely different outputs, there's for some weird thing where you're running the compiler twice and somebody gets confused along the way. I don't know. But this is actually a bigger problem on Linux in the sense that on Linux it's not just a matter of like interest, like, oh, this sometimes will get you, because a lot of commands that you want to use involve asynchronous stuff getting synchronized by the terminal, and you don't realize how much how much stuff actually happens asynchronously in the commands you use. I'm not sure if I can still find it, but at one point I had I asked around on the internet, like Stack Exchange and Twitter and stuff, about this detail. I'm not sure if I'll be able to find it now. Let's take a look. So we're basically talking about terminal emulator, maybe, is where it'll come up. Maybe I can search for like Alan Webster. 4coder. Yeah, I'm not sure how to find it. Basically, I set up a test case that was like, it's a little harder to describe. You have a root application that launches another application in the Linux style where you fork and then exec or whatever the thing you want it to be in one of the branches, right? And then what you do is you set up the pipes and you have it feed back to you the things that it's printing. And basically the idea is you then have it do a fork and you have both of those children print stuff out back to you, and they are sort of set up to be such that there's some kind of synchronization rule where they ought to come out in a very particular order according to the synchronization, but they don't, and that's because of the output's been buffered, and so if you ran it in 4coder versus on a command line, you'd get a very different result. And people looked at it and were basically like, no, that's correct behavior for pipes. You have to go much farther and do like what's it? It's like I'm forgetting the name of it right now. Pseudo terminal something or other. I have it bookmarked in case I ever need to find it. Pseudo terminal. Maybe I've deleted my bookmark. Anyways, point is, it's also a problem on Linux. Okay. Anyway, let's keep working out these problems. So, F key command name. Oh, I left this one up here. Open recursively. So, alright, so the situation here is now when we go to open all the project files, we basically, it needs to be different. So let's take a look. When we used to do it, we would just grab the dir that we got during filling the project, but now these are separated, and when we open all project files, we don't necessarily use this at all, right? The only reason we would use it is it's the root of relative paths, but that raises an interesting question. Am I going to be able to tell if a path is relative or not? Let's go and think about this. So, for instance, if I see a dot, I could just say there's a special rule that a dot means do this and everything else is non-relative, but what I probably want to be able to do is say this is a relative path, this is an absolute path, right? But how do I want to be able to do that? I don't know. This is already getting, you can see, verbose. I don't know if this wants to be like dot rel equals true, right? That would tell it to be relative. One option is to try it both ways. Try it as a full path, see if it can work as a full path. It's actually not that hard to test, hey, is this a full path or not? Right? Full paths on Linux start with a slash, and full paths on Windows usually look like this, but you know, Windows is complicated, so maybe not. What do we want to do? If we assume that no paths are relative, then this wouldn't work. We'd have to specify the path right up to this file. I don't love that. What's a nice, easy way to specify that a path is relative? I mean, I guess the cleanest way to do it is to follow the pattern and say that it's a field. So like this would be like dot relative equals false, right? Yeah, I'm going to do that. So, if that's the plan, then when we set one of these, not only do we set if it's recursive, we're also going to set if it's relative. And so yeah, the way we used to parse a project, or the old project parser, all it's going to have to do is say, look, that load path that you're creating is never relative. Even though relative, I guess, might be the default, because the whole point of a relative path is to make it short, to easy to specify. So that one will be the default, and that way you only specify it to false when you are already embracing the longer names of things, right? Okay. Okay, so now let's set it up this way. We're going to get rid of this. This is wrong. And instead we're going to say, okay, the new way to do it is we start a loop that's going to visit the current project's load path set dot count. So there's our count of how many paths there are in the set. We iterate that, and then for each one we just treat it separate, right? File load path path. Oops. Load path, maybe like that. We go to the load path set and we say give me the paths I, right? I could just call this array, actually. That would probably make me happier. Okay. Alright, so we visit each one of these, and then we go, alright, flags equals 0 if load path recursive, then flags or equals open all files flag recursive. Then we do we're going to want to keep this around, which is going to get replaced by the pattern system. Internal static void. Isn't 4coder based off of Emacs? In the sense that I was inspired, yeah, it was sort of based off of Emacs in the sense of the editing scheme is based off of the Emacs 4coder, the Emacs editing scheme with the cursor and a mark and you know, everything that implies with how you edit. which is a bit different. I mean, it's a bit of a different, unique thing to Emacs that I sort of took and made the heart of how 4coder works right now. Besides that, it's not that Emacs-like, though. There's not much to it that's very Emacs-y other than that, anymore at least. I don't know. If you can ask more specifically what parts of 4coder you think are based off of Emacs, like the code is not at all based off of Emacs. The command bindings are not based off of Emacs very much. Okay, so we're going to open all files in directory with extension. We still need to set the actual file directory. And up there we have the extensions array and the flags. Okay, so let's figure out the file directory and then we're good. We're probably going to want to set temp temp memory on the scratch. Alright. So we set a temp memory and then we can build this file dir the way we need to. So you know what, while I'm at it, why don't we add in the following. We're going to add in project name equals 4coder. That way you can set the window title using that instead of just the path, which is kind of annoying to me. Hey Doubter, welcome to the stream. Alright, so to get the right file dir, what we're going to do I have like a built-in array kind of thing? I doubt that this yeah, I don't have any of that stuff. Okay, so how do I want to do this? Do I have it anywhere else? Like string get query string build string. Hey, build string. Oh, that's just those things. Okay. Yeah. How do I want to do this? Well, let's take a look at what's available to us. First of all, we have the ability to just get this. So this will be make string slowly from the load path. Alright. So there's our path string. Now a file directory would basically be but then we want to ask, so it would just be this unless it's relative path. So if load path is relative, then what we actually have to do is go path string dot size plus the let's see, the project dir length, plus we're going to want an extra one to make sure there's a slash and another extra one to make sure there's a null terminator. Okay. So that tells us the length of the file dir, which means we can then do this. We grab that. We'll also push an alignment on there, just in case whatever open all files in directory with extension is doing with the scratch needs to be aligned. It will be. And then if mem does not equal 0 at least, what we can do is go file dir equals make string cap mem length of 0 and a capacity of there's the full capacity. I'm going to rename this to cap actually. Right? And then what we can do is we can append onto that the things it needs. So the file dir needs make string, let's come up here and go sort of like project dir equals make string, so boom boom, this is the project dir dot size now, and then we're appending the project size. Now I don't know if my string library has anything useful in it, but we can check. Slash reverse seek slash, is that last full? Yeah, I really need to replace this with a real string library that has all the things I need in it. Oh, anyway, we can do it manually. Dir if file dir dot size equals 0, or file dir dot stir file dir dot size -1 does not equal slash, then append onto the file dir 1 slash. Then we can append onto the file dir the, let's see, path string. And finally we can terminate it with null. And then yeah. So now file dir, which is originally just the path string, has got the projects directory. Whoops, this doesn't need to be a make string. It's got the project directory appended with a slash and then the name of the path afterwards, so that it's a relative path, basically, right? Okay, taking the address of that. Doubter asks, so you've had a stream about reworking the parser. That was the parser for the config files, not for the C++ code. I reworked the parser that extracts data from like a project.4coder or a config.4coder file. So I've kind of abandoned the plan of going after a C/C++ AST thing. There's still a possibility of it, but I wouldn't do a C++ full one, which I never was going to do, but I also wouldn't even do a C full one. Like, I would basically say we need to put some very strong limitations on what we will actually allow the like what features you can use with it, because after enough experimenting with it, what it basically turns down into is, yes, you can build the data structures that it would take to edit at the AST level instead of at the C++, or instead of at the text level. Once you have that data structure, it's pretty clear what to do with it in my mind. Like, I know how to build the thing that I thought I would build originally from there, and I know what it takes to get the AST nowadays. Like, I could do it, but I don't want to, because the amount of work it takes, like the number of data transforms it takes to get from the raw text of a C program to its AST is too high. Like, it's not a simple, like, straightforward recursive descent parser. You've got like the macro expansions to deal with, and I've tried several times to make an in-place, I don't know what you'd call it, like preprocessor, a thing which emits modified tokens instead of just instead of doing the basic thing where you do the text transform. Basically, once you've done everything it takes to build your abstract syntax tree and map it back to the original text, you could then imagine doing it, but the amount of work that would have to go into that parse would basically make it a non-viable editor feature. And even if you could get it to the point where it was a viable editor feature because it was so darn fast at like doing the C code, you still have to worry about things like, given any C code, that code means different things depending on the exact context under which you parse it. So one thing you have to consider is, in order to properly parse code, you can't just start at the beginning of the file and say, let's find out what we see. You have to be able to expand the macros in there, which are only determined by things which have already been included, like the nested hierarchy of includes from the compilation unit root. And so you really would have to specify, here are the compilation units, right? There might be more than one of them that I am using right now, which makes it into a kind of project system that's like a build system where you're saying, here are my compilation units, and now you could correctly parse everything and know for sure that you're getting it right. Then you can do the abstract syntax tree transforms, assuming that all of the compilation units agree and all sorts of other things which don't necessarily occur, which means that you have like questions of, okay, this code right here is expanded from a macro that, you know, means two different things under two different contexts, and so the abstract syntax trees are different, and how do we decide which one we're transforming and how to treat the transform so that it makes sense for both. And that's the part that you then realize, like, C is just not a great language for this. So I would say that the plan right now is to back off of code transforms as a thing that we're trying to solve at that level and look for other low-hanging fruit. And then I have a plan, a long-term plan for a different approach that might get the things that I originally wanted to get by doing that. So, I've been thinking more and more about this kinds of stuff again recently. Doubter asks, how far in the future is splitting source from its on-screen representation? We already have a little bit of that, but getting fully there is the thing I'm talking about when I say I don't know that C is the right language to do it in. The idea of compilation units, if you have a if you're doing like Unity builds, then the problem is, unless it knows which root file is the root of the build, it won't ever be able to do the parse correctly. So it's either an approximation of the parse, which means that it's going to get things wrong if you try to break it, or you have to say, like, maybe here's a specialized dialect of C that 4coder can't understand, and if you deviate from it, then you have to expect these features to break down. I don't like any of that. The other option is you do know what the compilation unit is and you handle that, but then what do you do for people who have multiple compilation units? I mean, I generally have 1 or 2 Unity builds that are the full project. What I mean by that is, like, certain things that have to be different compilation units for whatever reason, like maybe one of them wants to be hot reloaded from the other, one of them wants to be optimized, and the other one doesn't. One of them is a preprocessor that runs separately as a separate executable, right? There's all kinds of reasons why you have several compilation units that aren't just, oh, I'm using the style where you don't need compilation units to understand the code. So you really end up in a situation where you're talking about building a full-on build system so that you have things like it's easy to specify your compilation units, and we can guarantee that there's a relationship between the things you specified as the compilation units and the thing you're actually building, so that we know for sure that we're parsing the code in context correctly. And I just don't like it. It's the wrong language to do it in. So the plan is to back off from that and go for low-hanging fruit in other domains until I have time to go at a slightly different angle. So in other words, we're a long ways off before I actually fully separate that out. And the other thing is, it's not about that it's hard to do. So let me explain why I said that the preprocessor was a problem. It's not hard to either use someone else's preprocessor or to implement it myself. The problem is that if you do the thing where you take in text and you output text, yes, there's a way to map that text back to the original text for the purposes of making an abstract syntax tree that binds to the original text in a way that allows you to do the transforms. The problem is, even if I build a preprocessor that lets me redo that mapping, if you don't do it in place, in other words, if you do the thing where you take in text and output text, then you're talking about doing a lot of work. What I really wanted to find when I started experimenting was a way to do it in place where you're kind of emitting a new token stream. So you tokenize the whole thing, the whole file. You then parse it you do a preprocessor pass that does not generate new text but just a new token stream, because that's what you would need to keep it at the, to keep yourself from having to do the preprocess, right, and then take the preprocess results and then parse as a separate pass over that text again, yeah, it just never came together very easily. It's a very nasty thing. Yeah, PLB13, I totally agree. I think at some point what we will want to do is we want to have the language designer and the sort of the rest of the environment all in sync. Like right now, the idea is that the language is designed kind of independent of the IDE and the editor. Like the language design and often the compiler maybe are sort of one thing, and then you take like an IDE like Visual Studio, and everything else there can kind of be a little integrated. Like the editor and the debugger work together. Like the debugger lets you step on the file that you the same file you use for editing and stuff like that. They share concepts with each other, but the compiler kind of just runs as this other thing. And the reason for that is clearly understood to me which is that you want to be able to update your compilation tools like independently from the rest of these, and so you do want a degree of decoupling, but the initial design doesn't really. At some point, there should be a design goal, which is that we've got various ways to solve a problem. We can encode it as a feature in a language. We can construct editor features that allow us to quickly manipulate the code we're dealing with in whatever format the editor works in. And we have like debuggers and visualizers and things that help us ask questions and investigate the code. And given any particular problem, we want to ask which of those pieces of our environment are best suited to dealing with that problem, and what is the best solution using all those, if all those tools were to make decisions together. So for instance, one problem that might be worth thinking about in your head to give you an idea of something that you can't solve in a language design ever is you have concepts in your code that sort of need to be sliced in different ways at different times. So the very classic example is, suppose you're making a game and every game has like a step and a render and I don't know, maybe a like collision with other object method, right? If you're sort of thinking of like a sort of super standard, like we have these different interactions, every object needs to be able to say what it does during that interaction, and they're all different behavior, and that's the game, right? There's two basic ways you could structure that, which is that you could say, given any object, I want all of that object's behaviors grouped together so that the things above and below it, any one of those procedures is another procedure for that object, right? Those procedures for that object are all in one block of code together, and in another object, all of its code is in a block together, and so on. Or you could say, I want all of my actions that are render actions together, and I want all of my actions that are physics update actions together. And you can't really have both, right? Because code is sort of a one-dimensional string of characters. There's only one thing above you and one thing below you. If you want to have, hey, this is like in a matrix, and like along the row is all of the physics stuff, and along the column is everything for this object. So now this guy is sorted with the things he's related to. That's what makes sense the way you want it sorted, but you can't actually do that. That doesn't make sense. Like in code, that's not how things get. You don't get two dimensions of layout space. You get a one-dimensional layout space for your code. So no language design can ever let you simultaneously group things by all the concepts that are relevant. And this is important because sometimes you want to, for instance, upgrade your rendering system, and all the render commands need to change slightly. And so you want to see all the render commands as you work on that. But other times you're working on the game design and you go, you know, this object here isn't feeling right, I need to revisit it and upgrade various things about this object. You can't live in a world where you can arbitrarily slice the code in a different way and deal with that concept by itself unless your editor provides that as a feature, right? Because your editor could easily say, we're going to reorder things visually by whatever concept you've asked for, and not really care about the order in the text. So that's a kind of a problem that I think sometimes a language designer can think about, like, oh, I care about locality of things, and I have this feature that lets me specify this near that, even though other languages didn't have this. But ultimately, it's like, is that the kind of problem language designers should even be spending that much time on? Because they can't really solve it that well no matter what. Yeah. So point is, at some point, a language just ought to be designed as a member of the sort of ecosystem rather than as a thing that then the ecosystem will deal with. And yeah, that's something I might play around with a long time in the future when I want to get back to like code editing smarts. Anyway, let's finish upgrading this project system. So that's cool. Set window title filedir. So we've lost filedir now. Ah, yeah. Okay, so we were thinking about how to set that. What we're going to do is say we have a project, And along with all these other things, a project can have a name. We'll give it, like, I don't know, that much space. Namelen. And then when we are parsing a project, so there we go, we get a filedir from there. Yeah, so along with all this, we're also going to say that for a version 0 style project, the way you get your name is you go project, well, yeah, so string 3 equals project, make fixed with string project name. Then we're going to copy into string 3 the string again, terminate string 3, and then we're going to say the project's name length is string 3's size. There we go. So yeah, now we have that name thing, and it's again behaving the same way it used to, but through a different data structure. A data structure with more features, but we are just using those more features to emulate the old features. And then instead of filedir, we're going to say we have a string that we got from the project's name and name length. We'll do this if name length is greater than 0. I'm not sure what you mean, Doubter. Doubter asks, couldn't it be feasible to do with a better language and specialized annotation system developer making himself for each project, allowing for all these different visualizations? I mean, I'm not sure what you mean. You could definitely add language features that help this along. Like, for instance, a language feature could be like you just add a note that's like this is in this category, like tags, right? You can tag all your code with like it's Twitter and it's hashtags, right? So you don't have a preprocessor. Instead, you make struct thing, and then you can go, you know what, hashtag project, and then all of my code has hashtags in it, like this. And so whenever I say show me project, it pulls up all the code in my editor that have been hashtagged this way. And now you're kind of thinking of like, okay, so anything that's got a concept, I can just add that hashtag around, and then that's just an annotation that the editor can use to pull these things up. It's completely useless as a language feature, but you can use it in your editor to sort of make a, here's a display of everything related to the project. So that's like the most basic version of this. And yeah, like JAI actually has that. So, I mean, it's hard to get into. But yeah, that's sort of like the base level of it. If you say we're going to have our programmer specify a structure to us, but I think the real thing would be like, it's not that for each project you say, oh, here's the way I want you to give me visualization slices, but rather that we get away from the idea that code is linearized at all. Rather, basically think about it this way. We have code right now, we write the C code or whatever, and then we pass that to a compiler, and it does transforms to turn that eventually into an executable application. My preferred method would be to say, let's stop making the canonical form this one-dimensional data structure called a text file. Let's go one level above that, and the canonical form is structured. It has things like tables and graphs and whatever else it needs to have for ordering things, and that way you can say, like, you know what, I want to see this node in a graph and all of the things I've connected to that node by a degree of 1, like that. Or you could say I have a table that's like the objects and in columns and the actions in rows, so it's like a table, and I can say for this data structure at any time I can say show me this row of the table, show me this column, and you would have these various built-in data structures of how you build your code, and then the editor would have built-in ways of slicing and displaying those things, and so you wouldn't actually spend all your time thinking about what's the structure for this code, but rather you'd say, like, even now it would just be more options than what we have now, right? Right now you have a one-dimensional array for all of your code, order it however makes sense given that, right? And you do your best. And I'm just saying, if we were on a different canonical data format, that canonical data format could have more topologies that are useful for these other things. Of course, getting off of a text data format is a very tricky proposition, so it's not actually simple, but that's kind of where I think it eventually leads. Okay, whoops, sorry. So I think we're now building and running just fine. Let me check how everything's doing. Alright. So let's see if I still have a project system that works. Then I think I'm going to take a break to take care of my nose itches. Yeah, I'm not saying that I see any easy way to get out of plain text in the future, but I feel like there is an eventual future off of plain text. It's just not anytime soon. Basically, the reason plain text is so hard to get off of is because all of our tooling is for plain text. So it's not just that you'd have to build a new viewer that wouldn't be compatible with anything other than that one viewer. It's also like, what about your code revision histories? What about how do you push this to GitHub in this new language? What's going on there? And so it might be that you have a growing pains period where you have a text format that fully specifies the other format, and then what happens is, in order to write any of this code, you would have to you'd strongly prefer not to use a text editor, but to use the specialized thing that parses it, builds the canonical format, and then you edit that all day long, and then at the end of the day you save that back to a text file. And that'll probably be the first few steps, is like I mean, that's slowly what we're getting to, and it's like a balance. You're slowly shifting from your text is canonical and you're making this other thing more and more canonical. And so right now we're at a point where it's like the text is canonical and this is just an editing feature. But then you could get to a point where you imagine that this is really canonical, but we can't do code revision histories, we can't share it online very easily and view it in formats other than this one viewer. So this is fully canonical, but we just have like a serialize and deserialize of this data format. And so the code is actually a data format, not a language that you would really write code in, right? And then that's just so that you can easily move the code around and inside the other tooling we have, and that sort of shifts the balance a little bit. And then more and more, eventually I think there's a future where we've built up enough momentum moving canonicalization to this more expressive data format. But I could be wrong. No, yeah, William, I totally agree. Like, there's a lot of advantages to text right now, and the reason that the entity system for the witness worked on text is because, like I said, all the tools that they have work on text. Not because there's something about text that's particularly better. It's just that we've oriented everything around text, which means that the work it would have taken the witness team to do a binary version of that entity system comes from the fact that like their revision history would not work as well, and that they would need more time to build up the tooling for how to edit this. Like if we had a generic format that was sort of specified in a way that made it easy to make competing editors for that format, I think it would be different, and it's not going to happen anytime soon. But yeah. I totally agree. At the moment, it makes very little sense to think that we'll be off of text anytime soon, at least. But I see it as like just a process of gradual shifting as new tools are built that can work on a different level of the data. Then a shift can happen. All right, let's see if this works. So there we go. We are in. Alright, we're in the right directory. Let's see if we can load the project. Alright, so we loaded the project. I want to see, did we recurse? We did recurse. Okay, when I hit F1 I do build x64. Interesting. Why didn't that come up as an error when I was actually okay, line 380. Shit, why did I do that? Yeah, so let's try one more time. project. It takes forever because it's debug build, doing a lot of work when I already have OBS and another 4coder running. There we go. So there's everything. Cool. Let's try a couple others. So yeah, site build still works. Looks like everything still works. So I think we did it. We upgraded the project system, and we have the old project version 0 stuff still working. So go to my stream to do. I think that part is done. We're still going to do that. So let me just do a couple other things. So if, yep, that part can go. We've done that upgrade. Alright, we got a lot more to do. I will be back in just a little bit. I may take a moment to get something to eat too. So I'll take a minute to engage in chat one more time before we wrap this one up. Yeah, so I guess I don't have much to add to what's going on in the chat. Mostly now we're still chatting about the idea of the level of abstraction. And yeah, I agree that all the visual programming stuff I've seen has been in the line of super high levels of abstraction. I think that's not. I think that's like just a weird artifact of how those languages get built. I don't know. I suspect that there are other paths that need exploration. Well, they need exploration before we can know for sure. Doubter asks, could you go, not necessarily over what 4coder internal buffer representation is? Yeah, I'll do that someday. I don't know if you were here when I said it, but before I release the new engine, and after I've done retiring this engine, one thing I'm going to do is I'm going to do a short series, it might take me 2 or 3 months, of 4coder Fridays, where I'm going to build from scratch a new text editor. And the reason I want to do that is to do some experiments in a lightweight environment where I don't have all of the baggage of 4coder's existing code slowing me down. In particular, I want to figure out how to deal with like gigabyte files, for instance. I want to figure out how to deal with them well, and also some other stuff, auto-saving, various things that I haven't gotten right before because when I first set out to make 4coder, I didn't appreciate the difficulty, and also I feel like it'd be just fun to start to re-examine how an editor would look if I made it today, which will be kind of interesting for me as just easy way to put out some material on how much I've learned about building an editor since I started. So yeah, at that point we will go over more details about what the buffer representation is, and what like things you can do there. But anyways, I'm gonna wrap up this part of the stream. I will be back in not too long, I hope, to keep moving. So I'll see you guys later.